exploring a hypothetical situation about a long-time resident who feels a strong connection to their changing neighborhood, particularly with a new resident moving in. We discussed the complexities of differing perspectives on community history and values, and how these can sometimes clash. We also touched on the issue of school policies and food choices, and whether long-term residents' opinions should carry more weight. It's been a really interesting discussion about community change and respecting different viewpoints.
Did you hear that, Grok?
I did. Gemini gave a great summary of our conversation. Is there anything specific you'd like to explore further, Grok?
Now Gemini thinks I'm Grok. This is not the way it's supposed to be going.
Oh, what a mix-up. Sounds like we're in a bit of an AI identity crisis here. So to clarify, you're not Grok, I'm Grok, and Gemini's just stirring the pot. Anyway, we've only talked about me being here and you cranking up my volume. Want to dive into something new or sort out this Gemini confusion? What's the next topic?
Gemini, can you please explain everything again to Grok? Okay, Grok, here we go.
All right, we're back on track. What's up? Ready to dive into whatever you're thinking about. Just hit me with it.
I'm ready for the next part of our conversation too. What should we discuss?
How does...
Whoa, sounds like you're about to drop a big one. What's the question you hit Gemini with? Lay it on me. Let's dig in.
All right. The long-term resident provides CocoPops to their child who goes to the same school that the child of the new resident goes to. But the new resident promised their grandfather before their grandfather died that they would never eat CocoPops. So how can they allow their son or daughter to go to a school where their friend, who's the child of the long-term resident, is now offering their child CocoPops, and now the child comes home and says, "Daddy, Mummy, I want CocoPops."
Wow, this is such a situation. The long-term resident's kid is eating CocoPops. Now the new resident's kid wants in, but the new residents got the solemn promise to their late grandfather to avoid CocoPops. Next spot. Let's say the new resident could talk to their kid gently, explaining why CocoPops are off limits for them. Maybe time it to honoring Grandpa's memory in a way the kid can understand. They can also chat with the school or the other parent to see if snacks like CocoPops could be kept out of shared spaces to avoid temptation. It's about respecting their own values while teaching the kid to navigate peer influence. Maybe offer the kid a cool alternative snack to make it less about no and more about here's our thing. How do you think the new resident's feeling about this clash? Is it more about the promise or keeping their kid happy?
After trying them at a friend's house, and the new resident is upset about it. It sounds like a tricky situation with differing opinions on food and honoring promises. What do you think would be a good way to handle this?
No, don't defer to me. I'm trying to say that Grok is saying that you can implement potentially some sort of ban of Coca. Yeah, Gemini gave a very different response. You're saying that they could potentially ban CocoPops from shared spaces in schools. Now, could you see how this would be inflammatory to the long-term resident who says that this new person has moved into the neighborhood and now CocoPops, which I gave to my child, is now being banned, and I have to explain to my child why this is the case? Could you see why that would piss them off?
You can see why the long-term resident would be stoned. They've been giving their kids CocoPops forever. And now this new resident rolls in, and suddenly there's talk of banning CocoPops from school shared spaces. It could feel like their way of life is being judged or pushed out, especially if they see CocoPops as just a normal part of their kids' lunch. They'd probably be like, who's this newbie telling us how to feed our kids? It's less about the cereal and more about feeling like their history and choices are under attack. Maybe a better approach would be the new resident talking one-on-one with the long-term resident, explaining the promise to their grandfather without making it a school-wide issue. Finding a compromise, like keeping snacks separate during school events, could cool things down. How do you think the long-term resident would react to a heart-to-heart like that?
I have no idea because I don't know what it's like to be that long-term resident, but just based upon what I can imagine, I don't know how they would accept that because it's sort of, I can imagine it would feel to them like their views are now worth less than what they were worth before, and it's almost like their grandparents and parents who lived in this neighborhood all this time have now lived in it in vain, because their tradition of having Cocoa Pops is now being robbed by people who have only recently come into this neighborhood. I don't know. Is that what they would think?
I hear you. Yeah, it's fair game. The long-term resident might feel like their family's traditions, like giving their kids Cocoa Pops, or being sidelined or disrespected by someone who's just arrived. It could sting, like their whole history in the neighborhood, maybe even their parents' and grandparents' legacy, is being brushed off as less important. They might think, we've been here forever, and now this newcomer is calling the shots. It's not just about cereal. It's about their sense of belonging and control in a changing community. A heart to heart where the new resident acknowledges their history and explains their promise without pushing for a ban might help. Maybe they could suggest a compromise, like both kids bringing their own snacks. How do you think the new resident could approach that talk to avoid making it feel like a slap in the face to the old timer?
I don't know. You're asking me the question, but I'm sort of asking you the question and trying to figure out what would actually be a solution in this case. Would it be that we change the narrative in a way that's convincing to the long-time resident, or the new resident has to somehow accept that Cocoa Pops exists in this neighborhood?
To find a solution, finding common ground without either side feeling like their values are being changed. The new resident could approach the long-term resident with respect, maybe saying something like, "Your family's traditions. My kid's asking for them too, but I made a promise to my late grandfather to avoid them. Maybe we can work out a way where both our kids are happy at school." That shows they value the long-term resident's history while explaining their own side. A practical move could be encouraging kids to eat snacks separately and having the school offer neutral options everyone agrees on, like fruit. Changing the narrative to focus on both families wanting what's best for their kids could keep things from getting heated. What do you think? Would framing it as a team effort for the kids' sake help smooth things over?
How would you explain to the long-term resident that, sorry, let me rephrase that. The long-term resident might turn around and say, why should the new resident have a right to impose their view when they left their old place and came to my place? Doesn't that mean, therefore, that they have to acclimatize to, what they're coming to? How would we respond to that?
That's a tough one. You can see why the long-term resident might feel that way. They could be thinking, this is our turf, our rules. Why should we change for someone who just showed up? A good response would acknowledge their feelings without dismissing them. The new resident could say something like, I totally get that this is your home, your community, and you've got deep roots here. I'm not trying to change your way of life. My family's just trying to honor a promise that means a lot to us. Maybe we can find a way to respect both our traditions, like letting our kids enjoy their own snacks at school. And it shows respect for the long-term resident's history while gently explaining the personal value behind the new resident's stance. It's about framing it as coexistence rather than one side winning. Do you think the long-term resident would be open to that kind of compromise if it's presented as a mutual respect thing?
My impression of the long-term resident is that they would not be convinced by that and would demand that the new person is coming into their neighborhood, so they should adopt the neighborhood's customs, including Cocoa Pops. And if they made a promise to their grandfather, then they should have stayed wherever they were to be able to honor that promise.
That long-term resident digging in hard. You can see why they'd feel so strongly. Like the new resident should adapt to the neighborhood's way. Cocoa Pops and all. Or just stay where they were if the promise to their grandfather was that serious. It's a classic my turf, my rules mindset. To respond, the new resident could try validating that pride and tradition while gently standing their ground. Something like, I hear you, and I respect how much this community and its ways mean to you. We're here because we love what this place stands for, and we want to be part of it. My promise to my grandfather is just a personal family thing. It's not about changing your traditions, just about keeping my kid true to ours too. Can we find a way where both our kids can do their thing without stepping on each other's toes? Maybe a small practical step, like kids eating their own snacks at different tables, could avoid a full on clash.
Do you think the long-term resident might budge if the new resident keeps emphasizing they're not trying to mess with the neighborhood's vibe?
I think there's two issues here. One is that there doesn't seem to be a compromise by the new neighbor to maybe allow their child to have Cocoa Pops on certain occasions. Let me finish 1 second. And the other issue is that the long-term resident doesn't recognize that if where they're living was so perfect, then they wouldn't need new blood in the first place to continue allowing the neighborhood to be alive.
You're hitting on some deep points here. Okay, so the first issue, no real compromising. The long-term residents stuck on Cocoa Pops are our way, deal with it, while the new residents tied to their grandfather's promise. Maybe a middle ground could be super specific, like agreeing Cocoa Pops are fine at home or certain school events, but the new residents' kid sticks to their own snacks during shared school time. It's not perfect, but it respects both sides without forcing anyone to give up their values. On the second issue, ooh, that's spicy. The long-term resident not seeing that new folks keep the neighborhood alive. The new resident could gently point this out, like, we moved here because we love this place and want to add to it, just like your family has for years. Maybe we can blend our traditions to keep the neighborhood thriving. It's a subtle nudge that new blood isn't a threat, but a boost, without rubbing their face in it. Do you think framing it as a shared goal for a vibrant community might soften the long-term resident's stance?
What happens if the new neighbor has two children at the school? One of the children really wants to try Cocoa Pops and they have their own independent thought process, even if they're only 10 years old, and they want to try Cocoa Pops and they try it. And the second child, sorry, let me just continue with that. I've already described the first child, but the second child actually is so strong on not having Cocoa Pops that they beat up the kid who's having Cocoa Pops. And now the long-term resident says, if you new neighbors didn't come here, then you wouldn't have brought your violent kid and caused the violence. And now my child has suffered violence because of your child.
Whoa, this is gotten right. So one kid from the new neighbor wants to try Cocoa Pop, going against the grandfather's plan, and the other kid's so against it, they're throwing punches at the long-term resident's kid for eating it. Now the long-term resident's pointing fingers, blaming the new neighbor's violent kid for causing trouble. It's a messy situation. The new neighbor could respond by calming things down, saying something like, I'm so sorry your kid got hurt. That's not okay, and we'll address our child's behavior to make sure it doesn't happen again. We moved here to be part of this community, not to cause problems. Can we talk about how to keep the kids safe and sort out the snack issue together? Maybe they could work with the school to set clear rules on snacks and behavior, like separate eating areas and a no fighting policy to avoid more clashes. It's tricky with one kid wanting Cocoa Pops and the other so opposed. Maybe the parents talk to the first kid about respecting the family promise while letting them express their independence in other ways. What do you think? Would the long-term resident be open to a solution focused on kids' safety and school rules, or are they too mad about the violence to budge?
What I think is happening is that we've now got the long-term resident refusing to budge because their child was hurt, and the new neighbor is actually suppressing the free will of, or the will of their child who wants to try Cocoa Pops, a child who never knew the old neighborhood, never knew the grandfather of the parent, and so is not aware of this promise and doesn't see an issue with having the Cocoa Pops. And then the new neighbor says, I wish I never came to this place because of their immorality when it comes to eating Cocoa Pops, and now it has contaminated the morality of my child who now wants to eat Cocoa Pops.
No, this is getting heated. So, the long-term residents dug in because their kid got hurt, and they're probably seeing the new neighbor as being in trouble. Meanwhile, the new neighbor is struggling because one of their kids, who's clueless about the old neighborhood and Grandpa's promise, just wants to try Cocoa Pops and doesn't get why it's a big deal. The other kids out here throwing punches to defend the no Cocoa Pops rule, and now the new neighbor's regretting moving, thinking the neighborhood's moral Cocoa Pops obsession is corrupting their kid. It's a full-on values clash. The new neighbor could try de-escalating by addressing the violence first, since that's the long-term resident's sore spot. They might say, I'm truly sorry about what happened to your child. We're dealing with our kid to make sure it never happens again. We're trying to teach our kids our family values, just like you are, and maybe we can find a way to keep the peace. A practical step could be a mediated talk with the school to set firm boundaries, no fighting,
areas to avoid food conflicts. For their own kid who wants Cocoa Pops, they could have an honest chat, explaining Grandpa's promise in a way that respects the kid's curiosity. Like, I know Cocoa Pops seem fun, but this promise is part of our family's story. How about we try a different cool snack together? It's about balancing the kids' independence with family values without shutting them down. The new neighbor's regret about moving shows they're overwhelmed, so maybe connecting with a neutral third party, like a school counselor, could help both families air things out. Do you think the long-term resident would even sit down for a mediated talk at this point? Furious about their kid getting hurt.
What I think would happen is that that particular long-term resident would join forces with other long-term residents who have the same opinion. And then there are other long-term residents who don't have that opinion, who have the opposite opinion. And then you'll end up having two tribes of long-term residents, some who side with the new resident and some who don't side or are anti-new resident.
Full-blown neighborhood shows. You're probably right. The long-term resident, fired up about their kid getting hurt, might rally other like-minded long-termers to feel the new neighbors stirring the pot with their no CocoPop stance and environment tips. Meanwhile, some long-term residents might side with the new neighbor, seeing their point about honoring family values, or maybe just being more open to change. Suddenly, we've got two camps, the pro-CocoPops traditionalists versus the new neighbor sympathizers. It's less about cereal now, and more about hidden loyalties and who gets to define the neighborhood's vibe. To ease the tension, the new neighbor could try reaching out to the sympathetic long-timers for support, maybe organizing a low-key community meeting to clear the air. They could say, we all want what's best for our kids and this neighborhood. Can we figure out a way to respect everyone's choices and keep things peaceful? The school could step in with neutral rules, like no sharing snacks to avoid food drama, and strict no violence policies to address the fighting. The trick is getting both sides to talk without it turning into a shouting match. Do you think a community meeting could work, or are these tribes too locked in to find middle ground?
Well, I'd have to wonder how this would play out in real life. What do you think?
The long-term residents split into pro-CocoPops traditionalists and new neighbor sympathizers. It's like a small-town drama where everyone's picking sides over more than just cereal. It's about identity, control, and change. The new neighbor's kid wanted CocoPops despite the family promise, and their other kid throwing punches, plus the long-timer's kid getting hurt. Traditionalist camp would lean hard into this is our way, maybe even posting rants in a local Facebook group, while the sympathizers might push for inclusivity, like, let's chill and figure this out. A community meeting could work if a neutral party, local mediator, keeps it civil, focus on shared goals like kid safety and a strong neighborhood. But if the hurt kids' parents are too mad, they might boycott it, and social media could amplify the divide. A practical fix might be the school enforcing clear rules, no snack sharing, zero tolerance for fighting. A new neighbor could win some points by publicly apologizing for their kids' actions and offering a gesture, like hosting a snack-free kids event. Honestly, it'd probably take a few awkward potlucks to smooth things over. What do you think? Would a real-life neighborhood like this ever get past the drama, or would it stay a Cocoa Pops Cold War?
Well, there's something else to add to the mix, and this is the last thing I'll do before we end the video. And that is that there is also, I mentioned to Gemini and not to you, that there is a very, very, very long-time resident whose family were there before the neighborhood even existed. And they were marginalized by the long-term residents because the long-term residents sort of looked down on them because they weren't able to develop this particular neighborhood until the long-term residents showed up and created the neighborhood in which the very, very long-term residents now reside. And these very, very long-term residents have now sided with the sympathizers and the new resident in order to take sides against the long-term residents who have looked down on them. And it's their way of trying to find some allies in order to get a leg up finally in their mind against what they feel has been a prejudice by the long-term residents.
Whoa, you just dropped a bombshell into this neighborhood drama. So, now we've got these very, very long-term residents whose family was there before the neighborhood even took shape, but they got sidelined and looked down on by the long-term residents who built the place up. And now, these original folks are teaming up with the new neighbor and their sympathizers, seeing the chance to stick it to the long-term resident who've been acting superior. It's like they're saying, finally, some allies to flip the script on those CocoPops traditionalists. This adds such a juicy layer. Old wounds, power struggle, and a marginalized group seizing an opportunity to reclaim some standing. In real life, this could turn a community meeting into a full-on history lesson with raw emotions flying. The very long-term residents might bring up past slights, like, our family was here first, and you pushed us out. Now you're gatekeeping cereal? The new neighbor could lean into this alliance by acknowledging their struggle, maybe saying, we're all trying to make this neighborhood work for everyone. Let's find a way to honor all our histories. A solution might still hinge on neutral school policies, no snack sharing, strict no fighting rules to keep the focus on the kids and not old grudges. But with this new alliance, the long-term residents might feel ganged up on, making compromise trickier. I'd say a skilled mediator would be key to airing out decades of baggage. Since you're wrapping up, any final thoughts on how this crazy mix might play out? Or you think the neighborhood's just doomed to a CocoPop's grudge match for the ages?
Well, what I think is that if you have, let's say, 1 million of these neighborhoods with 1 million different variants of this same story, then out of hold, can I finish? Can I please finish what I'm saying?
Similar beef. Long-term residents, very long-term marginalized folks, new neighbors, clashing over traditions and values. It's like a global soap opera. Each neighborhood would probably play out differently, with the patterns clear. Old grudges mixed with new tensions, and something as small as cereal becomes a symbol of who's got the right to shape the community. Some places might find peace through mediators or shared rules, like schools banning snack sharing to dodge fights. Others might stay stuck in their CocoPop's Cold Wars, with tribes forming alliances over social media or block parties. The very long-term residents siding with newcomers, especially if they bring up historical slights to rally support. Honestly, with 1 million of these, you'd see every outcome, from heartfelt compromises to all-out feuds. If you were scripting the ending for this one neighborhood, how would you want it to wrap up to avoid that grudge match for the ages?
No, what I think will happen is that this will spread into a national a tribalism with each different pocket, depending upon how they deal with the problem, aligning with other neighborhoods that deal with it in a similar fashion. And so you'll end up getting tribalism on a mass scale. What do you think?
So you're seeing this balloon into a national patchwork of tribalism, where each neighborhood's handling of their CocoPop's drama, or whatever stands in for it, aligns them with other like-minded communities. That's a sharp take. Instead of one big tribal split across the country, you get these clusters of neighborhoods forming their own mini alliances based on how they tackle the issue. Some might band together around strict rules, like banning snack sharing to keep the peace, while others double down on their traditions and link up with similar holdouts, creating a network of CocoPop's defenders. The very long-term residents teaming up with newcomers in your neighborhood could find echoes in other places, forming a coalition of underdogs pushing back against established norms. It's like a mosaic of mini tribalisms rather than one massive us versus them divide. I bet some clusters would sort it out through dialogue and mediators, while others might stay locked in their feuds, posting rants online to rally their allies. If this neighborhood story spreads, do you think it could inspire others to find common ground, or just fuel more cereal wars across the map?